once I finally got into the horror genre and realized that there were horror books out there that weren't too scary, I was thrilled. So if you know me, you would know that I am not really a horror movie watcher or really a horror book reader. Historically in my life, I have really shied away from that genre on almost every level, except for I loved spooky stories, I loved ghost stories, I loved like spooky horror podcasts or like YouTube videos, that kind of thing, but I always shied away from movies and books for some reason. I am a bit of a scaredy cat, and I think that I derive a lot more enjoyment from getting my spooky slash horror content in little bite-sized pieces. However, a couple of years ago, I decided to really throw myself into the horror genre and really get to know what I would like from the horror genre, especially when it concerns books. And I really had to kind of like think about the different types of horror that I have loved throughout my life. And I realized that a lot of the horror that I enjoyed really kind of circled back to a lot of the horror that was shown in the TV show The Twilight Zone. I started watching The Twilight Zone, I believe, sometime in high school. And ever since then, I have been so obsessed with that show. I really enjoy it. I have so many favorite episodes. It's really hard to choose. I always think about it, I'm like, which is my favorite episode? I feel like I always go back to the episode where it's the teenage girl and she has to make a choice of whether she is going to stay in her original body or if she is going to go through the procedure that everybody else goes through in order to make herself more beautiful. And I love that episode so much. I go back to it so often and it is so timely. And I realized that the reason that I love the horror in the Twilight Zone is that while it is obviously so otherworldly, that is something so kind of like hyperbolic in a way, it still speaks a lot of truth through that hyperbolic storytelling. And I think that that is what I really gravitate towards when I'm looking for horror. I want something that feels real, that feels like it could happen, even if it is completely outlandish, completely otherworldly. It's heightened in a way. I still want it to feel real. I still want it to be rooted in reality, whether it's like social issues or it feels so real and doesn't kind of go into the super like blood and guts and gore and all that kind of stuff. I feel like that doesn't really work for me. And so I really wanted to make this video in order to kind of help other people who are similar to me, who have similar interests, who really enjoy the Twilight Zone, who have really enjoyed kind of like shorter formed horror and things like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark or the No Sleep podcast, that kind of stuff, and help you kind of transition into reading horror genre books. So I have a lot of books that I want to talk about, and I might not be able to get into like very minute detail with each of these books, but I wanted to talk about these and give you guys some recommendations. So we are going to get right on into the stack of books that I have. I'll start off with the physical books that I have, and then we'll kind of go into some of my like honorable mentions on my phone because I don't own all of like my horror favorites. So the first horror book that I really got into that really kind of sparked my interest in reading more horror was Baby Teeth by Zoya Stage. And I ended up picking up this book at Dollar Tree years ago, and it had been like kind of sitting on my shelf for a really long time and I just never picked it up. And then I started to kind of get interested in it. I'm like, you know what, I really want to pick up the books that have been sitting on my shelf for a very long time. And so I ended up picking this book up, and it just sent me on a huge, long, years-long ride, really. Baby Teeth follows this young mother and her daughter and the very psychological and horrific kind of twisted relationship that they have, where the mother is sort of recognizing these kind of like psychopathic tendencies within her daughter that her husband isn't picking up on. Like the daughter really gloms on to the husband and is very much anti the mother. And something that I really loved about this book is that it really delves deep into the mother-daughter relationship and how fraught that can be and how intense that is. Whether you love or you hate your mom, it's so intense. There's so much emotional baggage that is attached to that relationship in a way that isn't really attached to like the father-daughter relationship. And it really reminds me of that quote that's pretty famous that is like, the father and daughter laugh at the mother, but the daughter doesn't know that one day she will be that mother. That's a terrible summary of what that quote is, but it kind of gets the gist across. But I loved this book, and there's so many other books that are kind of like in this sort of subgenre of like mother-daughter, mother-child horror, and I love it. I will eat up any book that has a similar premise. Like, I read The Push, I believe by Ashley Audrain, and I really enjoyed that one as well. I think I liked Baby Teeth a little bit more, but The Push is also very, very good. The next book on this list is kind of more of like a gothic horror, and that's another thing that I realized about myself through this entire process, is that I love anything gothic. I will eat it up, I will pick it up immediately and devour it. I love gothic horror. It is so, so good. And one of the ones that I read a couple, maybe not last year, a year or so ago, was The Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. And this was perfect gothic horror with like a good dash of romance. And I think that's why I really gravitate towards gothic horror, is that they tend to have a good amount of romance included into the story and into the narrative, and that is like speaking my language. I love romance, and I love a book that includes a good romance. So gothic horror is usually the one that I will gravitate towards the most, and I really enjoyed this one. It also has a lot of like fantastical elements, and it really kind of draws a lot of inspiration from Alice in Wonderland, which is another really great book, and also kind of has like those horror elements as well, those like really like otherworldly elements that aren't quite as dark as horror, but have that same sort of feeling that horror gives. So I really, really enjoyed this one as well. And kind of going in deeper into the gothic horror genre, another one that I love is Catherine House. This is a gothic infused debut of a literary suspense set within a secluded elite university and following a dangerously curious, rebellious undergraduate who uncovers a shocking secret about an exclusive circle of students and the dark truth beneath her school's promise of prestige. I really, really enjoyed this book, and it really encapsulates a lot of the elements that I talked about loving in horror, is that like it has that sort of social commentary, it's gothic horror. There's not really that much of a romance in this book, so I wouldn't say that it has that element, but I think with the really strong social commentary in this book, it really, really worked for me. And also, this book was written by a Black author, and I think that she gives a really, really interesting and complex point of view into the gothic horror of it all, because I feel like sometimes gothic horror can be very much white and Eurocentric, and it's really, really refreshing to read books from authors of color. If you want to go for a classic gothic horror, like the gothic horror, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This one, the hype is real. Like, I'm so serious. It is written in an epistolary style, and I really enjoyed that element of this book. I wasn't really, I mean, I guess I didn't really know too much about Frankenstein before going into it. Like, I knew the overarching premise, but I didn't really know a lot about what this book would be like picking it up and reading it, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was so good, and the writing is just absolutely phenomenal. This is a book that is a classic for a reason. There's a reason why it's lasted this long and is still talked about to this day. It's so good. It's so iconic. Truly pick this book up. I don't know if I would say that this should be like your first foray into horror, but it's definitely worth a read. The next book is one that I feel like if you are going to jump into horror, this should be probably one of your first books that you pick up, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I have read 8 of her books in the past, 8 of them. I feel at this point like I'm a Silvia Moreno Garcia scholar. I love her work so much, and I started off with Mexican Gothic and I loved it so much. It has those romance elements, it has obviously the gothic horror of it all, and it's also written from a Mexican author, which I absolutely love, and she just brings something different to each of her books, but they all have that like Silvia Moreno Garcia essence and spark that is just so good, so magical, really draws you in to the narrative and into these characters' lives. And she is one of those authors that from the first page you are hooked. I never have to go through that sort of like phase of like picking up one of her new books and feeling like I don't know, like I really have to get used to this. Like, no, Silvia Moreno Garcia, she will drop you into a book and immediately start off full force running. Incredible narrative, incredible writing style, like it just grips you, and that's what I love so much about her books. Not every single Silvia Moreno Garcia book is horror, but there are, I would say, like maybe 1 or 2 other horror books that I would classify like in that genre that she's written, and this one is one of them, and I love it so much. It is so good. Basically, it's about the female main character, and she has gotten this letter from her cousin who just got married to a white man and is living with his family, and she is seeming very off and very desperate, and the female main character decides to go visit her and kind of see what's up, and she gets sucked into this really intense and secretive and spooky kind of family, and I love it so much. It is so good. Highly recommend literally anything she's ever written, but this one I feel like is a good place to start. The next book, another incredible gothic horror book. I didn't realize how much gothic horror I have on my shelves, but it's crazy. And that is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. And oh my gosh, I could gush about this book forever. I loved it so much. This really focuses on the marriage of convenience trope, which is really intriguing and kind of gives very similar vibes to the novel Rebecca, and I really enjoyed this one. It was so good. Also, the female main character is really autistic coded, which I appreciated personally, and it just like it clocked immediately. It clocked so fast that I don't know, I really enjoyed this book. I really felt seen. I just completely breezed through this one. It was so compelling and propulsive and just so much fun. Just like exactly what you want from a gothic horror novel. And the last physical book that I want to show you guys is Vassa in the Night by Sarah Porter, and this is a YA novel. I think it might be the only YA novel I'm going to talk about, and this one is so good. I have been screaming about this book for literal years, and I don't think I ever will stop. It, like, if you love the Twilight Zone and you love fantasy, what are you doing? Pick this book up. Pick it up. I love this one, and it's based on Russian folklore, which is really intriguing, and it's just so spooky and so fantastical and so just like mind-bending, mind-fuck kind of like vibe. I loved it so much. It was so good. On the back of the book, it has a quote from Kirkus Reviews, and it says, "In this urban fantasy take on the Russian folktale Vasilisa the Beautiful, Porter weaves folk motifs into a beautiful and gripping narrative filled with magic, hope, loss, and triumph, an enthralling, magic-tinged read about home, family, love, and belonging." And that's perfectly said, and I really love this book. It was so good. Definitely one of like my first introductions to a very like light horror novel, and I really enjoyed it. I think this is perfect, especially if you want to read it before Halloween. It's spooky. It's really good. Okay, so on to the books that I don't own but I have read and really would love to recommend them to you guys. So I think that if you are looking for like Latina authors, especially if you want to get into some more translated horror, which I personally really love, for some reason Latina authors who are writing these books in Spanish are just doing some incredible work, some really impressive work that you just do not see from writers who are doing their writing in English. It's just, it's so different, and I really appreciate their focus on including social issues into their horror, and so I have to recommend these books. So two that I would absolutely recommend is Tender as the Flesh and The Unworthy, both by Augustina Basterica and translated by Sarah Moses. I really enjoyed these books. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily my favorite, but I really enjoyed my time reading them, and they have a lot to do with social issues. Tender as the Flesh really deals with the meatpacking industry, and then The Unworthy really deals with like AI and all of the effects from the insane usage of AI. So highly recommend these two books. I also read a book by River Solomon earlier this year called Model Home, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this one, and this one deals a lot with racism and homophobia, transphobia, so huge trigger warnings for those if you are sensitive to those topics. But I really loved the portrayal and the kind of like examination of suburban life and family and like family dynamics, and it was so interesting with the way that they interact with race and queerness and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I thought it was really interesting. Highly recommend it. I definitely need to read more from River Solomon in the future. The next one is basically like a modern classic, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. 5 out of 5 stars. I said in my review, one of my new favorite books of all time, incredibly thought-provoking as most of Shirley Jackson's work is. I could see myself coming back to the story again and again. It is so good. It's a classic for a reason. It's stuck around for a reason. Shirley Jackson writes some of the most incredibly thought-provoking and scary, and just kind of like it lingers in the back of your head. Like, the type of horror that she writes is just, it's just there. It like hangs over you like a cloud, and I love it so much. This one was incredible. If you know Shirley Jackson, she wrote The Lottery, and that one is very much like Twilight Zone-esque, so love it. Highly recommend. The next book is another one that I really love, and that is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, and this is another Latina author who has done some really incredible work in the horror space, and absolutely phenomenal. This is another one that is very reminiscent of the Twilight Zone and really deals a lot with like the internet and like kind of parasocial relationships, and especially like parasocial relationships to sort of like AI models and stuff like that. It really focuses on this really like hot new toy that is kind of supposed to be a friend type of thing, and it's very creepy. Loved it so much. The next book I want to recommend is another one from a Latina author, and that is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas, and really enjoyed this one. Very like gothic horror romance vibes. Really enjoyed this one. I feel like this one, out of all of the gothic horror that I've recommended, is the most romantic. It is very much kind of like romance first and then gothic horror, so maybe as kind of like a gateway, this would be a great one to start with, because if you are not super well versed in horror and horror tropes and stuff like that, I feel like this would be a great way to start off and introduce yourself to the world of gothic horror. The next book is another hit from Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and that is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, and this is kind of a retelling of an older story. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but I really enjoyed this one. I loved the retelling. I thought it was so intriguing, and it really deals a lot with kind of like body horror, so that's like another sort of subgenre of horror. It's one that I haven't really gotten into as deeply as sort of like psychological horror or gothic horror, but I am very intrigued. So if you have any recommendations for body horror type of novels, definitely let me know in the comments. And the next one is another sort of gothic horror, and that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. And this one was really interesting because it kind of deals a lot with like a puritanical society, kind of almost cultish in a way, and I really enjoyed this one. and thought it was very, very intriguing. I remember reading it and I was like doing a lot of like sewing while I was reading this book, and I was just enthralled. It made the time go by so fast and it was incredible. It was such a good book. The next two books are by Carmen Maria Machado, and they are both Her Body and Other Parties and also In the Dream House, and I absolutely loved both of her works. I thought they were incredible. They both deal a lot with like psychological realism and comedy and horror and fabulism, and they're just very, very complex and layered. And Her Body and Other Parties is a short story collection, while In the Dream House is more of a memoir, and they are both so incredible. Definitely ones that I feel like are kind of like tenets of the horror genre, and I feel like if you are starting out with horror, they are two books that you absolutely need to prioritize, because I feel like they're mainstays in the horror genre. Definitely worth the read. And the very last author that I want to talk about and that I absolutely need to mention is Ling Huang, and she wrote two books, Natural Beauty and Immaculate Conception, and these are both kind of like semi-body horror, but also very much like social commentary type of horror. I wish I had like a real actual subgenre title for that. Maybe there is one and I'm just like not thinking of it, but I really, really enjoyed these two books. Definitely if you're a fan of the Twilight Zone, I feel like you would absolutely love these books. They are really, really incredible social commentary. Natural Beauty really focuses on sort of like the beauty industry and a lot of like beauty TikTok and stuff like that, whereas Immaculate Conception deals more with art and ownership of art and AI and that kind of stuff. So highly recommend both of these books. They are absolutely incredible. I read them both this year. So good. I think I like Natural Beauty a little bit more than Immaculate Conception, but they are both very good books. So those are all of the horror books that I wanted to talk about today. I hope that this video inspires you to check out the horror genre if you are not really that much of a horror reader. I think that there are so many incredible books in this genre to check out. There's something for everybody. I truly believe that. I didn't believe it before I started reading horror. I was like, I'm too scared to even like try to read a horror book, and I was worried that they would keep me up at night, and I was worried that it would just like make me way too paranoid, because it has happened in the past with podcasts. I have listened to way too many horror podcasts in the past and truly gotten so paranoid, and I was terrified of doing that with books. So I was really holding myself back. But once I finally got into the horror genre and realized that there were horror books out there that weren't too scary, I was thrilled. So I think that there is going to be a horror book in this entire video that you will absolutely love, and I hope that you check it out, and I hope that you come back and let me know if you ended up reading any of these books and liked them. Definitely leave it in the comments down below. Definitely remember to come back and let me know if you enjoyed any of them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Threads, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All the links are down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!